It is, thank you, Anis, and thanks to IOCE for having me here today. It's tough for an American to talk about decentralization because we kind of started decentralized and have sort of been centralizing ever since. And we in our country, as you alluded to, are federal, and we have 50 different models of decentralization because it's the states that get to determine how their municipal structures are set up. And I think that really is a strength and sort of answers some of the question here. Is this a scary process? Yes, trying to figure out the model can be a scary process, and yes, there will be some bumps along the way as we get it to work, but ultimately it's that flexibility, that ability to determine the model that gives decentralization its strength, because different models are going to apply to different places. We know the inputs of, if you will, of governance. Revenue and expenses, human resources, tax rates, regulations, zoning, provision of services, et cetera, et cetera. There's no magic formula for how much of each of those things we should have or at what levels we should set or what have you. So the ability for a municipality to determine it on its own is what gives the municipality the ability to adapt, to be flexible, to attract business, to grow the economy, et cetera. And that's what's going to make decentralization, I think, so powerful for Tunisia. When and by the way, I've heard that Tunisia is adding 80 municipalities, right, for a total of
25 March.
Right.
Maybe.
Well,
2018.
So I've heard people talk about this as a daunting number, and I looked before I came. In the United States, we have a total of 89,000 units of local governance. So I think 89,000. So I think that Tunisia will be able to manage 300 just fine. I think it will be excellent for the country.
We feel relieved here.
If you have a few extra, we can probably absorb a few more. That was a joke. As I was preparing for this, though, I caught a story in the news that I thought was particularly relevant to this conversation. Amazon, as you may have heard, is in the process of opening a second North American headquarters. And in doing this, they put out a bid to cities and states to be able to compete for this second headquarters. They stipulated a number of things in the RFP about what their needs were as a business. Notable for this conversation is that it had to be cities with 1 million population or more. And they promised that they would bring 50,000 jobs and about $5 billion in investment to the winning municipality where they opened their headquarters. 238 municipalities put in bids for this second Amazon headquarters, from the United States, from Canada, and from Mexico. Obviously, having that second headquarters is going to be good for those municipalities, but having this bidding process and being able to choose from among 238 municipalities is good for Amazon, because ultimately they're going to wind up having a city that best meets their needs, and with that, then they'll be able to perform better as an organization, grow the economy, et cetera. So this is really a win-win, and the ability of these communities to be flexible and to compete in that way is ultimately going to result in growth for everybody. So what do we see in the process of decentralization, looking around the world, so I've already said there's no formula, there's no magic formula for decentralization, what a municipality should look like. But there are some successful practices that communities have undertaken to ensure that process works. At the Center for International and Private Enterprise, where I work, our main mission is helping the private sector to engage in the policy process and to help to develop the economy. And so much of what I've seen in this process sort of centers on the private sector as an actor. And what's clear is that decentralized government needs decentralized society. It's not enough to decentralize just the administrative functions or the authorities of government, but everything that goes along with that in society will also need to be reoriented to match. And by that I mean the labor unions, the chambers of commerce and business associations, civil society organizations will all have to themselves decentralize to be able to address the local authorities. And this is a model that proves to be highly successful in ensuring that decentralization works for everybody. We've worked with groups around the world in this process. We have some very successful examples. In the Philippines, for example, the Institute for Solidarity in Asia helped municipalities to develop a public governance system, which is modeled after the Harvard Business School's balanced scorecard system, where they got together community council of the government, the private sector, civil society organizations, and together that group would set goals for the community and identify the priorities. Moving on from that, they would then work together to align the goals and the resources. And if there was something on the government's books that was a government program that was not in line with one of those priorities, it would need to be cut. Or if there was a priority that was not sufficiently resourced, they would need to identify how to go about that. And then they went on to create a reporting mechanism and to link individual performance to those goals so that the whole process worked right down to the line of the municipal employee. We have the example of San Fernando in the Philippines of about 250,000 people. And after instituting this process, they managed to increase revenue so that they didn't have to rely on the allotment they got from the central government. I know that balance is much discussed here in the Tunisian process. They were able to increase investments in education. They increased private investment and public-private partnerships. And they lowered poverty in their community by 70%, 70, down to under 2% of the population, which was a sixth of the national average. So real results based on this process. In Cambodia, we worked with a group that adopted a similar process, more of a citizen watchdog process for the local procurement process. They wanted to see if bringing greater transparency to the procurement process could result in benefit to the community. In fact, what they found was that they reduced the cost of procurements by about 50%. They took a budget for a 1.5 kilometer road, for example, and built a 2.5 kilometer road. And we have other examples of this. And then finally, going back to the private sector again, we have examples where private sector organizations come together at the regional level or at the municipal level to develop business agendas. They get the business community together to communicate about the needs of the business community, prioritize those needs, and come to a consensus on what those should be. And that helps the municipal officials to identify the areas that they need to work on governance-wise. All of these different methods that I mentioned help develop the capacity of municipal officials, which of course is going to be a challenge in the decentralization process, as many of these officials wouldn't have undertaken these responsibilities before. So all these really have resulted in benefit for their communities. And I think it's exciting what Tunisia is undertaking, because you see, as I mentioned, the flexibility to be able to adapt your communities to its needs, to govern an interior city differently than one here on the coast in Sousse, for example. But then there's benefits nationally as well. Municipalities can be training grounds for political officials such that when they come to govern nationally, they have some experience in governance at a smaller scale. There are greater checks and balances by having power decentralized at the local level, and so different authorities are interacting in a different way than they are in a centralized level. And maybe most importantly,
Excuse me, Mr.
municipalities...
Simpson, 2 minutes left.
Sure, thank you. municipalities and regions can be laboratories for national policy. And I mean laboratories, experimental sounds scary, I know, but I mean laboratories in the very best way. President Clinton in our country passed welfare reform in the 90s that has been very successful in the United States, but that was based on welfare reform that the state of Wisconsin had tried. Obamacare, our healthcare reform a few years ago, was itself based on healthcare reform that Massachusetts had successfully tried. We have any number of examples where we improve our police functions and reduce crime, looking at examples of cities like New York City who managed to try new things with policing. So I think it's a way to look at decentralization as definitely a positive for Tunisia is that as municipalities try different things, this will trickle up to the national level and you'll get the best result for the country as a whole.